April the 30th. Perfectly astounded at receiving an invitation for Carrie and myself from the Lord and Lady Mayoress to the Mansion House to meet the representatives of trades and commerce. My heart beat like that of a schoolboy. Carrie and I read the invitation over 2 or 3 times. Oh, I could scarcely eat my breakfast. I said and felt it from the bottom of my heart. Carrie, darling, I was a proud man when I led you down the aisle of the church on our wedding day. That pride will be equalled, if not surpassed, when I lead my dear, pretty wife up to the Lord and Lady Mayoress at the Mansion House. I saw the tears in Carrie's eyes, and she said, Charlie, dear, it is I who have to be proud of you. And I am very, very proud of you. You have called me pretty, and as long as I am pretty in your eyes, I am happy. You, dear old Charlie, are not handsome, but you are good, which is far more noble. I gave her a kiss, and she said, I wonder if there'll be any dancing. I have not danced with you for years. Cannot tell you what induced me to do it, but I seized her round the waist, and we were silly enough to be executing a wild kind of polka when Sarah entered, grinning, and said, There's a man, Mum, at the door who wants to know if you want any good coals. Most annoyed at this. May the 1st. I told Mr. Perkup at the office with a feeling of pride that we had received an invitation to the Mansion House, and he said, to my astonishment, that he himself gave in my name to the Lord Mayor's secretary. I felt this rather discounted the value of the invitation, but I thanked him, and in reply to me, he described how I was to answer it. I felt the reply was too simple, but of course Mr. Perkup knows best. May the 3rd. Carrie went to Mrs. James at Sutton to consult about her dress for next Monday. While speaking incidentally to Spotch, one of our head clerks, about the Mansion House, he said, Oh, I'm asked, but don't think I shall go. When a vulgar man like Spotch is asked, I feel that my invitation is considerably discounted. May the 7th. A big red-letter day, viz. The Lord Mayor's reception. The whole house upset. I had to get dressed at 6:30, as Carrie wanted the room to herself. Mrs. James had come up from Sutton to help Carrie, so I could not help thinking it unreasonable that she should require the entire attention of Sarah the servant as well. Sarah kept running out of the house to fetch something for the missus, and several times I had, in my full evening dress, to answer the back door. The last time it was the greengrocer's boy, who, not seeing it was me, for Sarah had not lighted the gas, pushed into my hands 2 cabbages and 6 coal blocks. I indignantly threw them on the ground, and felt so annoyed that I so far forgot myself as to box the boy's ears. He went away crying and said that he should summons me, a thing I would not have happened for the world. At 9 o'clock, Carrie swept into the room, looking like a queen. Never have I seen her look so lovely or so distinguished. She was wearing a satin dress of sky blue, my favourite colour, and a piece of lace which Mrs. James lent her round the shoulders to give a finish. I thought perhaps the dress was a little too long behind and certainly too short in front, but Mrs. James said it was à la mode. Mrs. James was most kind and lent Carrie a fan of ivory with red feathers, the value of which she said was priceless, as the feathers belonged to the Cachu eagle, a bird now extinct. We arrived at the Mansion House too early, which was rather fortunate, for I had an opportunity of speaking to his lordship, who graciously condescended to talk with me for some minutes. But I must say I was disappointed to find that he did not even know Mr. Perkup, the principal. I felt as if we'd been invited to the Mansion House by one who did not know the Lord Mayor himself. Crowds arrived, and I shall never forget the grand sight. My humble pen can never describe it. I was a little annoyed with Carrie, who kept saying, Isn't it a pity we don't know anybody? There was an immense crowd in the supper room, and my stars, it was a splendid supper. Any amount of champagne. Carrie made a most hearty supper, for which I was pleased, for I sometimes think she's not strong. There was scarcely a dish that she did not taste. I was so thirsty I could not eat much. Receiving a sharp slap on the shoulder, I turned, and to my amazement, saw Farmerson, our ironmonger. He said in the most familiar way, This is better than Brickfield Terrace, eh? I simply looked at him and said coolly, I never expected to see you here, he said with a loud, coarse laugh. I like that. If you, why not me? I replied, certainly. Wish I could have thought of something better to say. He said, can I get your good lady anything? And Carrie said, no, I thank you, for which I was pleased. I said by way of reproof to him, you never sent today to paint the bath, as I requested? Farmerson said, pardon me, Mr. Pooter. No shopwomen in company, please. Before I could think of a reply, one of the sheriffs, in full court costume, slapped Farmerson on the back and hailed him as an old friend, and asked him to dine with him at his lodge. I was astonished to think that a man who mends our scraper should know any member of our aristocracy. I was just moving with Carrie when Farmerson seized me rather roughly by the collar, and addressing the sheriff, said, let me introduce my neighbour, Pooter. He did not even say Mr. The sheriff handed me a glass of champagne. I felt, after all, it was a great honour to drink a glass of wine with him, and I told him so. We stood chatting for some time, and at last I said, you must excuse me now if I join Mrs. Pooter. When I approached her, she said, don't let me take you away from your friends. I'm quite happy standing here alone in a crowd, knowing nobody. As it takes two to make a quarrel, and as it was neither the time nor the place for it, I gave my arm to Carrie and said, I hope my darling little wife will dance with me, if only for the sake of saying we danced at the mansion house as guests of the Lord Mayor. Knowing how much Carrie used to admire my dancing in the days gone by, I put my arm round her waist and we commenced a waltz. A most unfortunate accident occurred. I had got on a new pair of boots. Foolishly, I had omitted to take Carrie's advice, namely to scratch the soles of them with the points of the scissors, or to put a little wet on them. I had scarcely started when, like lightning, my left foot slipped away and I came down, the side of my head striking the floor with such violence that for a second or two I did not know what had happened. I need hardly say that Carrie fell with me with equal violence, breaking the comb in her hair and grazing her elbow. There was a roar of laughter, which was immediately checked when people found that we had really hurt ourselves. A gentleman assisted Carrie to a seat, and I expressed myself pretty strongly on the danger of having a plain polished floor with no carpet or drugget to prevent people from slipping. The gentleman, who said his name was Darwitz, insisted on escorting Carrie to have a glass of wine, an invitation which I was pleased to allow Carrie to accept. I followed and met Farmerson, who immediately said in his loud voice, "Oh, you the one who went down?" I answered with an indignant look. With execrable taste, he said, "Look here, old man, we're too old for this game. We must leave these capers to the youngsters. Come and have another glass. That's more in our line." Although I felt I was buying his silence by accepting, we followed the others into the supper room. Neither Carrie nor I, after our unfortunate mishap, felt inclined to stay longer. As we were departing, Farmerson said, "Oh, you going? If so, you might give me a lift." I thought it better to consent, but wish I had first consulted Carrie. May the 8th. The morning after our attendance at the Lord Mayor's ball, I woke up with the most terrible headache. I could scarcely see, and the back of my neck was as if I had given it a crick. I thought first of sending for a doctor, but I did not think it necessary. When up, I felt faint, and went to Brownish's, the chemist, who gave me a draught. So bad at the office, had to get leave to come home. Went to another chemist in the city, and got a draught. Brownish's dose seems to have made me worse. Have eaten nothing all day. To make matters worse, Carrie, every time I spoke to her, answered me sharply. That is, when she answered me at all. May the 9th. Still a little shaky, with black specks. The Blackfriars Bi-Weekly News contains a long list of the guests at the Mansion House ball. Disappointed to find our names omitted, though Farmerson's is in plainly enough, with MLL after it, whatever that might mean. More than vexed, because we had ordered a dozen copies to send to our friends. Wrote to the Blackfriars Bi-Weekly News, pointing out their omission. Carrie had commenced her breakfast when I entered the parlour. I helped myself to a cup of tea, and I said perfectly calmly and quietly, "Carrie, I wish a little explanation for your conduct last night. She replied, indeed, and I desire something more than a little explanation of your conduct the night before. I said coolly, really? I don't understand you. Carrie said sneeringly, probably not. You were scarcely in a condition to understand anything. I was astonished at this insinuation and simply ejaculated, Caroline. She said, don't be theatrical. It has no effect on me. Reserve that tone for your new friend, Mr. Farmerson, the ironmonger. I was about to speak when Carrie, in a temper such as I have never seen her in before, told me to hold my tongue. She said, now I'm going to say something. After professing to snub Mr. Farmerson, you permit him to snub you in my presence, and then accept his invitation to take a glass of champagne with you, and you don't limit yourself to one glass. You then offer this vulgar man, who made a bungle of repairing our scraper, a seat in our cab on the way home. I say nothing about his tearing my dress and getting into the cab, nor of treading on Mrs. James's expensive fan, which you knocked out of my hand, and for which he never even apologized. But you smoked all the way home without having the decency to ask my permission. That is not all. At the end of the journey, although he did not offer you a farthing towards his share of the cab, you asked him in. Fortunately, he was sober enough to detect from my manner that his company was not desirable. Goodness knows, I felt humiliated enough at this. But to make matters worse, going into the room, without knocking, with 2 hats on his head and holding the garden rake in his hand, with Carrie's fur tippet, which he had taken off the downstairs hall peg, round his neck, and announced himself in a loud, coarse voice, His Royal Highness, the Lord Mayor. He marched twice round the room like a buffoon, and finding we took no notice, said, Hello, what's up? Lovers' quarrel, eh? There was a silence for a moment, so I said quietly, My dear Going, I'm not very well, and not quite in the humour for joking, especially when you enter the room without knocking, an act which I fail to see the fun of. Going said, I'm very sorry, but I called for my stick, which I thought you would have sent round. I handed him his stick, which I remembered I had painted black with the enamel paint, thinking to improve it. He looked at it for a minute with a dazed expression and said, Who did that? I said, Eh? Did what? He said, Did what? You've destroyed my stick. It belonged to my poor uncle, and I value it more than anything I have in the world. I said, I'm very sorry. I dare say it will come off. I did it for the best. Going said, Then all I can say is, it's a confounded liberty. And I would add, you're a bigger fool than you look. Only that's absolutely impossible.